The crystal chandeliers of the Bellevue Hotel ballroom cast fractured light across a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, each reflection a tiny star in a constellation of Philadelphia's elite celebrating veterans' day with champagne and self-congratulation. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the kind of money that never worried about next month's rent. A jazz quartet played something soft and forgettable in the corner, their music swallowed by the murmur of 100 conversations that meant nothing to anyone who wasn't part of this world. Rachel Martinez moved through the crowd like a ghost, her server's uniform marking her as invisible to the people whose drinks she carried. The black vest pinched at her shoulders, and the white shirt had been washed so many times the collar had gone soft and slightly gray. But it was clean and pressed and professional enough that the catering manager wouldn't send her home. Her feet ached in the discount heels she'd bought at an outlet store 3 months ago, the kind that looked acceptable from a distance, but pinched with every step. She'd been on her feet for 14 hours today. This was her third job of the day. The first had been the morning shift at the diner on Broad Street, where truckers and construction workers left dollar tips on $5 checks. The second had been 4 hours at the dry cleaner, where she worked the pressing machine in a back room that smelled like chemicals and never quite got cool even in winter. This gala was supposed to be her big paycheck for the week, the kind of event where wealthy people felt generous and the tips could actually make a difference. She wove between clusters of guests, offering smiles that didn't reach her eyes, her tray balanced with the kind of unconscious grace that came from doing this 1,000 times before. A woman in a red dress that probably cost more than Rachel's car waved her over with the casual entitlement of someone who had never worried about being seen. Rachel approached, offered the tray of champagne, received no acknowledgement beyond the woman taking a glass without breaking her conversation. Rachel had learned long ago not to expect thanks. Invisible was safer. Invisible meant no complications. Then she saw him. Derek stood near the bar, his arm draped around a woman whose designer dress and perfect makeup screamed money and status. His laugh carried across the room, that same sharp bark she remembered from 2 years of dating that had ended 6 months ago when he decided a waitress with a dead husband and a kid wasn't the kind of accessory his career needed. He looked exactly the same. Same expensive suit that probably cost what Rachel made in 3 months. Same perfectly styled hair that he spent more time on than she did. Same way of looking at the world like it existed to serve him. Her stomach twisted. She turned quickly, nearly colliding with another server, her tray wobbling dangerously before she steadied it. The champagne glasses clinked together with a sound like tiny bells. She needed to stay on the opposite side of the ballroom. She needed to finish her shift and collect her paycheck and leave before he noticed her. But the universe, it seemed, had different plans. His voice cut through the ambient noise like a knife through silk, loud enough to turn heads, cruel enough to make her blood run cold. "Oh my God, is that Rachel?" She froze. The tray felt suddenly heavy in her hands. Around her, conversations died as people tuned into the spectacle beginning to unfold. She could feel their eyes on her, curious and hungry for drama the way people always were when someone else's pain became entertainment. Derek was walking toward her now, the woman in the designer dress following with a smirk painted across her perfect lips. He looked her up and down with obvious contempt, his gaze lingering on her cheap shoes, her worn uniform, the exhaustion she couldn't quite hide. Rachel Martinez, working as a server. He said it like an accusation, like she'd committed some crime by existing in his space. "I heard you were struggling, but I didn't realize it had gotten this bad." The woman beside him laughed, a sound like nails on glass. "Derek, you actually dated her. That's adorable." Rachel's throat tightened. A small circle was forming around them now, wealthy guests drawn to the scene like moths to flame. She wanted to disappear, wanted to sink through the expensive marble floor and cease to exist. Instead, she forced herself to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, I'm working. Working 3 jobs from what I heard." Derek's smile was cruel. "Still can't make ends meet, can you? David didn't leave you much, did he? Just debt and a kid you can't afford." The mention of David's name in that mocking tone made something crack inside her chest. Her late husband's memory didn't deserve to be weaponized by this man. David Martinez had died with honor in Afghanistan, a Marine who'd given everything for his country. Derek wouldn't understand honor if it was explained to him in words of 1 syllable. "Don't talk about David." The words came out stronger than she'd intended. A few of the watching guests looked uncomfortable now, as if they were starting to realize this had crossed from entertainment into cruelty. Derek stepped closer, invading her space. "Why not? He's been dead for 5 years. You need to move on. Of course, who'd want damaged goods with a kid and bills?" He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin through the thin fabric of her shirt. Maybe if you'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have been so eager to stay deployed. The words hit like a physical blow. Rachel tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Around them, the crowd had gone almost silent now, the jazz quartet still playing, but the conversations dead. Everyone was watching. No one was intervening. Then she felt it, a shift in the air, a change in temperature that had nothing to do with the room's climate control. The crowd began to part like water around stone, and even Derek's grip loosened slightly as his attention moved past her shoulder. The scent reached her first. Expensive cologne, something dark and woody with notes of leather and bergamot. Then came the presence itself, a weight that settled over the ballroom like a physical thing. Rachel turned her head, following Derek's suddenly pale expression. The man walking toward them moved with the kind of quiet authority that age couldn't grant and money couldn't buy. It was the walk of someone who'd commanded men in life and death situations, who'd made decisions that left bodies in their wake. He was younger than she'd expected from the aura of power surrounding him, maybe early 30s, but he carried himself with the certainty of someone much older. His suit was impeccable, black and perfectly tailored to a body that spoke of discipline and violence held carefully in check. Dark hair, dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Handsome in the way dangerous things were handsome, all sharp angles and controlled intensity. 2 men flanked him, both built like walls, wearing identical expressions of casual menace. But it was his face that held her, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. A jawline that could cut glass and eyes that held absolutely no warmth as they fixed on Derek's hand, still gripping her arm. The entire ballroom held its breath. He stopped 3 feet away from them, and Rachel noticed how the crowd instinctively gave him space. The way conversations didn't just die, but seemed to evaporate in his presence. One of his bodyguards murmured something in his ear, too quiet for Rachel to hear, but those dark eyes never left Derek's face. "You're hurting her." His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried through the silence like a blade through silk. There was an accent there, subtle but present. East Coast Italian, the kind that came from growing up in neighborhoods where family meant everything and outsiders meant nothing. Derek's hand dropped from her arm as if she'd burned him. "We were just talking. It's none of your business." "It became my business the moment you put your hands on her." The man took a step closer, and Derek actually backed up, bumping into his date, who had gone very still and very quiet. "Apologize." "What? I don't even know who you think you are." "I wasn't asking." Those dark eyes flicked to Rachel for just a moment, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical touch. Something in her chest tightened, a warning or a promise, she couldn't tell which. Then he looked back at Derek. "Apologize to Mrs. Martinez, now." Derek's face had gone from pale to red to pale again. Rachel could see him calculating, trying to figure out who this man was, why everyone in the ballroom had gone so quiet, why even the other wealthy guests were giving them a wide berth. His date tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently, but Derek's alcohol-fueled arrogance made him stupid. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this is between me and Rachel. We used to date, and I have every right to talk to my ex." The man's expression didn't change, but one of his bodyguards took a single step forward. The movement was minimal, but the threat was crystal clear. Derek flinched so hard he nearly fell over his own feet. "I'm sorry," the words burst out of him, loud and desperate. "Jesus Christ, Rachel, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry." Not sincere, the dark-eyed man's voice remained conversational. "Try again." Derek was sweating now, his expensive suit jacket dark at the armpits. "I'm sorry, Rachel, I shouldn't have grabbed you. I shouldn't have said those things about David. I'm sorry." The man studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Leave." Derek didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his date's hand and practically dragged her toward the exit, their expensive shoes clicking rapidly against the marble floor. Several other guests suddenly discovered urgent reasons to be somewhere else, the crowd thinning as people made themselves scarce. Rachel stood frozen, still holding the tray, her heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. The man turned to face her fully, and up close he was even more devastating. His eyes weren't just dark, they were nearly black, with a depth that suggested violence and secrets and things she shouldn't want to know about. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice was different now, softer, though no less commanding. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and his fingers brushed against her arm where Derek had grabbed her. His touch was surprisingly gentle, his skin warm against hers. She shivered despite the room's temperature. "You'll bruise." He said it more to himself than to her. Then those eyes met hers again, and she felt trapped, pinned by the intensity of his gaze. "Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight?" The question should have seemed strange, overly personal from a stranger. Instead, it felt inevitable, like he'd been building to this moment since he'd walked into the ballroom. "Yes, home, after my shift." "Your shift is over." It wasn't a suggestion. He turned to one of his bodyguards, a silver-haired man with kind eyes. "Marco, make sure the management knows. Mrs. Martinez is done for the evening. Full pay." "Wait, I can't just leave. I need this job." The words came out in a rush. She couldn't afford to get fired, couldn't afford to lose even one night's tips. He was already looking at her again, and the words died in her throat. "You're shaking." She was. Her hands trembled enough that the glasses on her tray rattled together. He reached out and took the tray from her, handing it off to another server who'd materialized from somewhere. Then he shrugged off his jacket, impossibly expensive. She could tell from the weight of the fabric alone, and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. It smelled like him. That dark cologne and something else, something uniquely masculine that made her head spin. "Sit, you need a moment." "I'm fine," she lied. But her legs chose that moment to betray her, going weak at the knees. His hand caught her elbow, steadying her, and suddenly she was being guided to one of the plush chairs near the edge of the room. She collapsed into it, the jacket still around her shoulders, and the tray finally left her trembling hands as another server took it. The man crouched down in front of her, putting them at eye level, and she noticed for the first time the way his suit pulled across his shoulders, the elegant watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her entire life, the small scar above his left eyebrow that spoke of violence in his past. "What's your name?" he asked. "Rachel." Her voice sounded small, foreign. "Rachel Martinez." "Rachel." He said it like he was tasting it, rolling it around in his mouth. Then something flickered in his eyes, recognition and pain and something deeper. "Rachel Martinez, your husband was David Martinez, Corporal, United States Marine Corps." The world tilted sideways. She stared at him, unable to process how this stranger knew David's name, knew his rank, knew anything about her dead husband. "How do you know that?" The question came out as barely a whisper. The man was silent for a long moment, something working behind those dark eyes, some calculation or memory or decision being made. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old ghosts. "Force Recon, 2nd Battalion, we served together. Afghanistan, 2019, Helmand Province." He paused and she saw his jaw tighten. "I was there when he died." Rachel's hands flew to her mouth. 5 years. 5 years since the Marines had shown up at her door with their dress uniforms and their carefully practiced words of sympathy. 5 years since they'd told her David had died a hero, killed in action, that he'd saved his unit. 5 years of living with a ghost and a 5-year-old daughter and debt that never seemed to end. And here was a man who'd been there, who'd seen David's last moments, who knew something about her husband's death beyond the sanitized version the Corps had given her. "You were his sergeant." The realization hit her like a freight train. "Dominic, David talked about you in his letters, said you were the best leader he'd ever had." The man's expression cracked, just for a moment, revealing something raw and wounded beneath the controlled exterior. "Dominic Castellano. Most people call me Dom." He stood, running a hand through his dark hair, and she saw his fingers shake slightly. "I've been looking for you for 5 years, Rachel, trying to figure out how to keep a promise I made to a dying Marine." She stood too, unsteady, the jacket slipping off her shoulders. Dom caught it, held it, but made no move to put it back on her. They stood there in the ballroom, surrounded by the detritus of the wealthy's celebration, and Rachel felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff with no idea how far the fall would be. "What promise?" she managed. Dom's dark eyes met hers, and in them she saw guilt and determination and something that looked almost like devotion. "He asked me to take care of you and Lily." His last words. "Take care of Rachel and Lily. Promise me, brother." So I promised. The mention of her daughter's name from this stranger's mouth made her take a step back. "How do you know my daughter's name?" "Because I've been keeping that promise." He said it simply, as if it explained everything. "Your medical bills after David died, the ones that mysteriously got paid off, that was me. The scholarship to Lily's daycare, the one for military families, I arranged it. The Christmas gifts that showed up with no return address, me." Rachel's mind reeled. All those small miracles over the past 5 years, the things that had kept her and Lily afloat when she was drowning, they hadn't been luck or charity or bureaucratic error. They'd been this man, this stranger who'd known David, who'd made a promise to a dying Marine and had spent 5 years keeping it from the shadows. "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why would you do that?" Dom looked away, toward the ballroom's tall windows where the Philadelphia skyline glittered in the November darkness. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he wasn't quite managing to contain. "Because David Martinez saved my life. Because he died covering my position during an ambush. Because I gave the order that put us in that situation, and he paid the price for my mistake." He turned back to her, and she saw moisture in those dark eyes. "Because I've lived with his blood on my hands for 5 years, and the only thing that lets me sleep at night is knowing his family is taken care of." Rachel's own eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of this man who was a stranger and somehow not a stranger at all. Not in front of the remaining guests who were still watching from a careful distance. "I don't want blood money." The words came out harsher than she'd intended. "I don't want charity from someone who feels guilty." "It's not charity." Dom's voice hardened. "It's a debt, one I'll never finish paying. David was my brother in every way that matters. His family is my responsibility. We're not your responsibility. We're nothing to you. You're everything to me. The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. You're all I have left of the best Marine I ever served with. You're the reason I keep going when everything else says stop. You're the promise that keeps me human. Before she could respond, before she could process what he was saying, a commotion at the ballroom entrance drew their attention. A nervous-looking man in an expensive suit approached, keeping a respectful distance from Dom. Mr. Castellano, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation that requires your attention. Dom's expression shifted, the vulnerable man disappearing behind a mask of cold authority. What situation? Your lawyer called, the emergency custody hearing. It's been moved up. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Rachel's blood ran cold. The custody hearing. Derek had filed it 2 weeks ago, claiming she was an unfit mother, that she couldn't provide for Lily, that a child deserved better than a struggling waitress for a parent. She'd been trying to scrape together money for a lawyer, but the retainer alone was more than she had. How do you know about that? She asked Dom, but she already knew the answer. He'd been watching, protecting, keeping tabs on every aspect of her life. Dom turned to the nervous man. Call Richard Chen. I want him representing Mrs. Martinez. Full retainer, whatever it takes. Sir, Mr. Chen is booked for the next 6 months. Then unbook him. This takes priority. The man nodded and hurried away. Dom looked back at Rachel, his expression unreadable. I don't need your help, Rachel said, but even she could hear how weak the protest sounded. Yes, you do. Derek Patterson is a corporate lawyer with connections and money. He'll bury you in the system and you'll lose Lily because the courts favor wealth over love. Dom stepped closer, and she could see the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. I won't let that happen. I promised David I'd take care of his family. That means all threats, legal or otherwise. Why does Derek even want custody? He never cared about Lily when we were together. Dom's expression went dark. David had a death benefit trust for Lily, $250,000, untouchable until she's 18 unless her legal guardian needs it for her care. Derek found out about it. The words hit like a slap. He's doing this for money. He's doing this because he's a parasite who sees a vulnerable target. Dom's hands clenched into fists at his sides. But he made a mistake. He hurt you in front of me, and I protect what's mine. I'm not yours. The words hung in the air between them. Dom studied her face for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. No, he agreed quietly. But you're David's, and that makes you family, and I protect family, Rachel, that's not negotiable. Before she could respond, movement near the entrance caught her eye. A man was entering the ballroom, late 50s, silver hair, expensive suit, moving with the same predatory grace Dom possessed. 2 bodyguards flanked him, and Rachel watched as the remaining guests gave him even more space than they'd given Dom. Dom noticed her attention and turned, his entire body going rigid. Rachel, get behind me. What? Why? Because that's Vincent Romano, and if he's here, it's not a coincidence. Vincent approached with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. He looked between Dom and Rachel, and his smile widened. Dominic Castellano, I heard you were making a scene over some waitress, had to see for myself. His gaze slid over Rachel like she was a piece of meat. I can see the appeal. Widow of a war hero, struggling single mother, very noble of you to play White Knight. Dom moved, positioning himself fully between Rachel and Vincent. This doesn't concern you. Everything in Philadelphia concerns me. Vincent's voice hardened. Especially when my competition starts making emotional decisions. Getting soft in your old age, Dom. I'm 32, hardly old. Old enough to know better than to advertise your weaknesses. Vincent nodded toward Rachel. That's what she is, you know, a weakness, something your enemies can use against you. Dom's voice dropped to something deadly quiet. Is that a threat? It's a friendly observation. Vincent pulled out his phone, showed Dom something on the screen. Rachel couldn't see it, but she saw Dom's jaw clench. Those are photos of Mrs. Martinez and her daughter leaving the courthouse 2 weeks ago, filing that restraining order against her ex. I know where she lives, where the daughter goes to daycare, where she works all 3 of her jobs. Rachel's blood turned to ice. This man, this stranger with the cold eyes and colder smile, had been watching her, watching Lily. Dom's hand shot out, grabbing Vincent's wrist with enough force to make the older man wince. You go near her or the child, and we're at war. Full-scale, burn-it-all-down war. You understand me? Vincent jerked his hand free, rubbing his wrist. Relax, Dominic. I'm just making sure you understand the stakes of your chivalry. He smiled at Rachel, all teeth and no warmth. Enjoy your night in shining armor, Mrs. Martinez. Just remember that armor gets heavy, and when he gets tired of carrying you, you'll be all alone with people like me who know exactly where to find you. He turned and walked away, his bodyguards following, leaving a wake of tension behind him. Dom stood rigid, his breathing controlled but his hands still clenched into fists. Who was that? Rachel asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Dom turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that frightened her more than Vincent's threats. It was the look of a man who just declared war and was calculating the casualties. Someone who just made the biggest mistake of his life. Dom pulled out his phone, typed rapidly. Marco is going to take you home. Pack bags for you and Lily. Enough for a week. What? No, I'm not running. You're not running, you're accepting protection. Dom's voice left no room for argument. Vincent Romano is a crime boss, Rachel. He doesn't make empty threats. If he knows where you live, where Lily goes to school, then you're not safe. Neither is she. The word crime boss ricocheted around her skull. This man, this Dominic Castellano who'd known her husband, who'd been paying her bills for 5 years, who just defended her honor in a ballroom full of Philadelphia's elite, he was talking about other crime bosses like it was normal. Like he was. What are you? The question came out as barely a whisper. Dom looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw him make a decision. Saw him choose honesty over comfort. I'm the man who runs the Castellano family. Import, export, construction, real estate, all legitimate on paper. But underneath, he paused, weighing his words. Underneath, I control territory, I settle disputes, I protect people who pay for protection. I'm what the movies call a crime boss, though the reality is more complicated than Hollywood makes it. Rachel should have run, should have screamed, should have called the police. Instead, she heard herself ask, did David know? No, I was just his sergeant when he knew me. I came home from Afghanistan in 2019 after he died. My father had just passed. Cancer. I inherited the family business 6 months after losing my best Marine and my old man. Dom's expression was bleak. David died believing I was a good man. I've spent 5 years trying not to prove him wrong by at least keeping the promise I made to him. By protecting his widow, with blood money from criminal enterprises. By protecting his widow however I can. Dom stepped closer, and she should have backed away but couldn't. I won't apologize for what I am, Rachel, but I will keep you and Lily safe. That's not negotiable. So you have a choice. Pack a bag and come to my safe house where Vincent can't touch you. Or refuse and watch me put guards on your apartment, your jobs, Lily's school, everywhere you go until this is resolved. That's not a choice. That's an ultimatum. Yes, he agreed simply. Because Vincent Romano doesn't play by rules, and I won't watch David's family suffer because you're too proud to accept help." Rachel looked at this man, this criminal, this stranger who carried her dead husband's memory like a sacred trust. She thought about Lily, 5 years old and innocent, who didn't deserve to be a pawn in whatever game these dangerous men played. She thought about David, her Marine, who'd asked this man to protect them with his dying breath. 1 week. Her voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her. 1 week in your safe house until the custody hearing is over and Derek backs down. Then we're done. Something flickered in Dom's dark eyes. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. 1 week, he agreed. But they both knew it was a lie. Whatever this was, whatever had started the moment he'd intervened between her and Derek, it wasn't going to end in a week. It was going to end in blood or redemption or something in between. Dom made a call, speaking rapid Italian into his phone. Rachel stood there in the ballroom, wearing a stranger's jacket that smelled like expensive cologne and violence, and wondered what David would think of this moment. Would he be grateful his brother in arms was protecting his family, or horrified at what Rachel was walking into? Marco appeared, the silver-haired bodyguard with the kind eyes. "The car is ready, Mrs. Martinez. I'll take you home to pack." Rachel looked at Dom one more time. "Why does Vincent want to hurt me? I'm nobody." Dom's expression went dark with an emotion she couldn't name. "Because he knows the fastest way to destroy me is through the things I care about. And he just figured out that I care about keeping my promise to David Martinez more than I care about my own life." The words settled over her like a shroud. She followed Marco toward the exit, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. At the door, she looked back. Dom stood alone in the ballroom, his phone to his ear, and even from a distance she could see the coiled violence in every line of his body. He looked like a man preparing for war. She'd spent 5 years grieving her husband, raising their daughter alone, trying to survive. Now she was walking into the orbit of a crime boss who'd made a promise to a dying Marine. She should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time since David's death, she felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. Hope. Rachel turned away and walked out of the ballroom, into the November night, toward whatever came next. Behind her, Dominic Castellano made call after call, mobilizing an army to protect a woman he barely knew because of a debt he'd never stopped paying. "Semper Fidelis," the Marines said, "always faithful." Dom was about to show Vincent Romano exactly what faithful meant, and it was going to cost everything. The safe house wasn't what Rachel had expected. She'd imagined something dark and temporary, a warehouse conversion with exposed pipes and the smell of old concrete. Instead, Marco drove them through the pre-dawn streets of Philadelphia to a tree-lined neighborhood in Chestnut Hill, where old money lived quietly behind stone walls and manicured hedges. The townhouse he pulled up to looked like something from an architecture magazine, all clean lines and tall windows, the kind of place that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. Lily stirred in the backseat, her 5-year-old body curled against Rachel's side, thumb in her mouth the way she always slept when she was scared or uncertain. Rachel had woken her at 3 a.m, packed their bags with shaking hands while Marco waited patiently in the hallway of their cramped apartment. She tried to explain in words a child could understand. A friend of Daddy's was helping them. They were going somewhere safe for a little while. It would be an adventure. Lily had asked if Mr. Dom would be there, the nice man from the party who'd given Mommy his jacket. Rachel hadn't known how to answer that. Marco opened the car door, his grandfather's face kind in the dim light from the townhouse's entrance. "It's secure, Mrs. Martinez. Guards on rotation 24/7, panic room in the basement, cameras on every approach. Mr. Castellano wants you to feel safe here." Safe, the word felt foreign in her mouth. She hadn't felt safe since the Marines had knocked on her door 5 years ago to tell her David wasn't coming home. She gathered Lily in her arms, the child's weight familiar and precious, and followed Marco up the stone steps. The interior matched the exterior's quiet elegance. Hardwood floors the color of honey, furniture that looked comfortable rather than showy, a kitchen with granite counters and appliances that probably cost more than Rachel's car. Lily woke fully as they entered, her dark eyes taking everything in with a child's uncomplicated wonder. "Mommy, is this our new house?" "Just for a little while, baby." Rachel set her down, watched her daughter's bare feet pad across the floor toward a living room where toys had been carefully arranged on shelves. Brand new toys, the kind Rachel could never afford. A dollhouse, building blocks, stuffed animals still wearing their store tags. Marco cleared his throat. Mr. Castellano had some things brought in, for the little one, thought she might be more comfortable. Rachel's throat tightened. This criminal, this man who ran an empire built on activities the law called felonies, had thought about her daughter's comfort. Had bought toys for a child he'd never met because that child's father had died saving his life 5 years ago in a desert halfway around the world. "The bedrooms are upstairs," Marco continued. "Yours is the master, overlooks the garden. We set up the smaller room for Lily, connected by a bathroom. Clothes in the closets, basics in the kitchen. Anything you need, just ask." "When will he be here?" Rachel asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Dom." "He'll visit when he can. Right now he's handling the Vincent Romano situation." Marco's expression darkened. "Making sure Romano understands that threats against you and the child have consequences." The word consequences carried weight, the kind that suggested violence Rachel didn't want to imagine. She thought about Vincent's cold smile in the ballroom, the casual way he'd revealed he knew where Lily went to daycare. Men like that didn't respond to strongly worded letters or police reports. They responded to force, and Dom was apparently fluent in that language. The first 2 days passed in a strange limbo. Rachel and Lily existed in the townhouse like ghosts haunting someone else's expensive life. Lily adapted with a child's resilience, playing with the new toys, exploring the garden under the watchful eyes of guards who pretended to be landscapers. Rachel couldn't sleep. Every sound made her jump. Every car passing on the street outside sent her to the window, checking, waiting for Vincent Romano to materialize from the shadows. Dom visited on the 3rd evening, appearing without warning in the doorway of the kitchen, where Rachel was trying to teach Lily how to make pasta from scratch. The child saw him first, and her face lit up with uncomplicated joy. "Mr. Dom." She launched herself at him with the fearlessness of 5-year-olds everywhere, and Rachel watched this dangerous man catch her daughter, lift her up, his expression transforming into something gentle and almost vulnerable. "Hello, princess. Are you taking care of your mother?" "We're making spaghetti. Mommy says Daddy used to make it for her before he went to heaven." Dom's eyes found Rachel's over Lily's dark curls, and the pain in them was so raw she had to look away. He set Lily down carefully, produced a stuffed rabbit from his coat pocket like a magician pulling tricks. "I brought you a friend. Thought you might want company at bedtime." Lily clutched the rabbit with reverence, already naming it, already spinning stories about its imaginary adventures. Dom moved into the kitchen, his presence filling the space despite the room's size. He wore jeans and a dark sweater tonight, no suit, looking younger and somehow more dangerous in casual clothes. There was a bandage on his left hand, white gauze peeking from under his sleeve. "You're hurt," Rachel said. "It's nothing. Disagreement with a door that didn't want to open." He said it lightly, but his eyes were hard. The door had probably been attached to one of Vincent's operations. The disagreement had probably involved more than words. They ate together, the 3 of them, and Rachel watched Dom interact with Lily with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything she knew about him. He answered her endless questions with patience, made her laugh with silly voices, cut her pasta into smaller pieces without being asked. He was good with children. The realization unsettled her. After Lily was asleep, tucked into her new bed with the rabbit clutched tight, Dom and Rachel stood in the hallway between their rooms. The silence stretched, weighted with things neither of them knew how to say. "The custody hearing is tomorrow," Dom said finally. "Richard Chen has everything prepared. Derek won't know what hit him." "I should be grateful." Rachel kept her voice low, aware of Lily sleeping nearby. "You're helping me keep my daughter, but I keep wondering what the cost is, what you'll expect in return." Dom's expression hardened. "I don't expect anything, Rachel. I made a promise to your husband. This is me keeping it." "Nothing in your world is free. You said yourself you control territory, settle disputes, run protection. That's organized crime dressed up in expensive suits and nice words." "Yes," he agreed simply. "It is. But what I do for you has nothing to do with business. It's personal. David was my brother in every way that mattered. I got him killed. The least I can do is make sure his family is taken care of." "You didn't kill him. The war killed him." "I gave the order that put him in the wrong place at the wrong time." Dom's voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of a man who'd had this argument with himself 1,000 times. "He died because I made a tactical mistake. That's on me, always will be." Rachel wanted to tell him he was wrong, that war made casualties of good men and blame was pointless. But she saw the set of his jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides, and knew he wouldn't hear it. Guilt like his didn't respond to logic. It lived in the marrow of bones, permanent as scars. "What happened to your hand?" she asked instead. "Vincent had a gambling operation in South Philly. Had, past tense." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "He knows now that threatening you was a mistake. I'm making sure every one of his operations understands that message." "You're starting a war because of me." "I'm finishing one he started." Dom stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne, see the shadow of stubble on his jaw. "Vincent thought he could use you to control me. He was right that you matter. Wrong that it would make me weak. It makes me dangerous." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they kindled something warm and unwelcome in her chest. She'd spent 5 years invisible, struggling, alone. Now here was a man willing to burn the city down because someone had threatened her. It was wrong and intoxicating in equal measure. "I don't want to be the reason people get hurt," she whispered. "Then you shouldn't have married a Marine who asked me to protect you." Dom's hand came up, touched her cheek, the gesture achingly gentle. "This isn't your fault, Rachel. It's mine for caring enough to keep my promise, and Vincent's for being stupid enough to think he could touch what I protect." He left before she could respond, disappearing into the November night, and Rachel stood in the hallway touching her face where his fingers had been, wondering when her life had become a storm she couldn't navigate. The custody hearing the next morning was everything Rachel had feared, and nothing like she'd expected. Richard Chen was a small man in an expensive suit who radiated quiet competence. He met them at the courthouse, briefed Rachel in calm, measured tones, then proceeded to dismantle Derek's case with surgical precision. Derek's lawyer presented the narrative of an unfit mother, a waitress drowning in debt, a woman who couldn't provide stability for a child. Chen countered with documentation of Rachel's exemplary parenting, Lily's excellent health and development, testimony from the daycare about Rachel's dedication. Then he produced the evidence that changed everything. Financial records showing Derek had been systematically embezzling from clients. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, a paper trail that suggested fraud on a scale that would end careers and possibly result in criminal charges. Derek's face went from confident to pale to gray as Chen laid it all out for the judge. "Your Honor," Chen said, his voice never rising above conversational. Mr. Patterson's interest in custody appears directly correlated to his discovery of the death benefit trust established for Miss Lily Martinez. $250,000, accessible only through the child's legal guardian for approved expenses. Mr. Patterson has significant debts and legal exposure. This is not about being a father. This is about access to funds. The judge's expression could have frozen water. She denied Derek's petition, maintained Rachel's full custody, and suggested Derek's employers and the state bar might be interested in Mr. Chen's documentation. Derek left the courtroom flanked by lawyers, his career imploding in real time. Rachel should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt numb. She'd won, but only because Dom had deployed resources she couldn't have imagined. Money, lawyers, investigators who dug up dirt that destroyed a man's life. Derek was a parasite and probably deserved it, but the casual efficiency of his dismantling frightened her. This was Dom's world. This was what he did, and she was benefiting from it while pretending to have moral high ground. Chen drove them back to the townhouse, made sure they were settled, then disappeared with the same quiet competence he'd shown in court. Rachel sat in the expensive kitchen, drinking coffee that tasted better than anything she'd ever bought, and tried to reconcile the man who'd bought her daughter toys with the man who just destroyed Derek Patterson's entire life with a few phone calls. That night, after Lily was asleep, Rachel found herself restless. The townhouse felt like a gilded cage, beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. She wandered the first floor, familiarizing herself with the space, and found herself drawn to a door she hadn't noticed before. It was unlocked. The office beyond was Dom's sanctuary. She knew it immediately from the scent of his cologne lingering in the air. Dark wood, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface empty except for a laptop and a crystal decanter of amber liquid. She should have left, should have respected his privacy. Instead, she moved deeper into the room, drawn by something she couldn't name. The walls caught her attention. One entire wall was covered in framed photographs, military photographs. Men in desert camouflage, weapons ready, eyes shadowed by exhaustion and determination. At the center was David, her David, younger than she remembered, smiling that crooked smile she'd fallen in love with, his arm around Dom's shoulders. Both of them looked impossibly young, impossibly alive. Surrounding David were 23 other photographs. Different men, different faces, but all Marines. All wearing the same uniform, the same expression of warriors who knew what war cost. Beneath each photo was a nameplate. Ranks, names, dates. KIA, all of them killed in action. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. This wasn't just about David. Dom had lost 24 brothers, a platoon's worth of men who'd served under his command, who died in the same war that had taken her husband. The survivor's guilt must be crushing, the weight of 24 ghosts. A leather journal sat on the desk. She knew she shouldn't, knew this was crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed, but her hands moved anyway. Opened the cover. Found pages filled with neat handwriting, entries dated, organized. She found David's entry, March 15, 2019. David Martinez, 23 years old, married to Rachel, daughter Lily 3 months old when he deployed. Best Marine I ever had the privilege to lead. Died covering my position during ambush in Helmand. Took 3 rounds meant for me. Bled out before Cass evac arrived. Last words, take care of Rachel and Lily. Promise me, brother. I promised. He died believing I'd keep that promise. Every day since, I've tried to honor his memory by protecting what he loved. Rachel and Lily are all I have left of my best friend. I will not fail them. I cannot fail them. David saved my life. The least I can do is make sure his sacrifice meant something. Tears blurred Rachel's vision. She turned pages, found other entries. Each dead Marine had a page. Each one detailed how they'd died, what Dom had learned from it, how he was honoring their memories. It wasn't obsession. It was penance. A man trying to carry the weight of 24 brothers who died under his command. She understood then. This wasn't about romance or possession. Dom didn't want her. He wanted redemption. She and Lily were the mission that let him sleep at night, the promise that made the survivor's guilt bearable. He was haunted by ghosts, and she was the only exorcism he had. The realization should have brought relief. Instead, it broke her heart. This man, this dangerous criminal who ran an empire built on moral gray areas, was doing it all while carrying enough grief to drown most people. The Marines had sent him home broken, and he'd built a life around the pieces that remained. "You shouldn't be in here." Rachel spun. Dom stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. She clutched the journal like evidence of a crime. "I'm sorry. I was restless. The door was open." "I know." He moved into the room, took the journal from her hands, set it back on the desk with careful precision. "I left it open. Wanted you to find this. Wanted you to understand." "Understand what?" "That this isn't about you." He gestured to the wall of photographs. "It's about them. About failing 24 times and trying to get it right on the 25th. You and Lily are my chance to save someone, to protect something that matters. I don't expect you to love me or owe me or be grateful. I just need you to let me keep this one promise." Rachel's throat tightened. "You didn't fail them. They were at war. People die in war." "They died because I made mistakes." Dom's voice was flat. "Wrong intel, bad positioning, tactical errors. Every one of these men trusted me to bring them home. I didn't. The only thing I can do now is make sure David's trust wasn't completely misplaced. By protecting us. By trying to give his daughter the life he wanted for her. By making sure his widow doesn't struggle alone. By being the brother he thought I was." Dom turned away, poured amber liquid from the decanter into a glass. Whiskey from the smell. "That's all this is, Rachel. A debt I'll spend my life paying." She should have felt used, reduced to a checkbox on a dead man's promise. Instead, she understood. Dom was drowning in guilt, and she was the only life preserver he had. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't healthy, but it was honest. "What about what I want?" she asked quietly. "What do you want?" "I want my daughter safe. I want to not live in fear. I want to feel like a person instead of a responsibility." She moved closer, saw his shoulders tense. "I want to stop feeling like Charity." "You're not Charity." Dom's voice was rough. "You're sacred. Everything I'm not. Everything I failed to protect in Afghanistan. You represent every family I sent condolence letters to, every widow I couldn't face, every child who grew up without a father because I made the wrong call." "That's not fair to either of us." Rachel put her hand on his arm, felt the tension thrumming through him. "You can't fix the war by fixing me. It doesn't work like that." "I know." He set down the glass, untouched. "But it's all I have. This mission. This promise. Take it away and what am I? Just another criminal who came home from war and couldn't figure out how to be human again." The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in her chest. She thought him cold, calculated, dangerous. He was all those things, but underneath was a man who'd seen too much death and couldn't figure out how to live with it. "You're more than that," she said softly. "David wouldn't have trusted you otherwise." Dom looked at her then, really looked, and she saw wetness in his dark eyes. "I hope you're right, because most days I can't remember who I was before the war, before the bodies, before coming home to find my father dead and an empire I never wanted waiting for me." Before Rachel could respond, before she could navigate the dangerous territory of comforting this man who terrified and intrigued her in equal measure, Dom's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression transformed from vulnerable to lethal in a heartbeat. "What?" Rachel asked, fear spiking through her. Vincent made a move. Dom was already texting, his fingers flying across the screen. He took someone, using them as bait. Who? Dom's eyes met hers, and in them she saw fury and calculation and something that looked like dread. Your sister, Maria. The world tilted. Maria. Her younger sister, 30 years old, a teacher who lived in Fishtown and had nothing to do with any of this. Maria, who'd helped Rachel when David died, who babysat Lily, who was innocent and didn't deserve to be dragged into this nightmare. No, the word came out broken. No, he can't. She has nothing to do with this. He knows that. That's why he took her. Dom was making calls now, rapid Italian, his voice hard with command. He wants you. Trade your sister for yourself. Neutral location. Midnight. Rachel's mind spun. Then we go. We make the trade. It's a trap. Dom's voice was harsh. He'll kill Maria anyway. Then he'll kill you. Or worse, keep you alive to use against me. I can't let my sister die because of me. And I can't let David's widow walk into an ambush. Dom grabbed her shoulders, forced her to look at him. Rachel, listen to me. Vincent doesn't play fair. He doesn't honor deals. If you go, you die. Maybe Maria dies anyway. Probably we all die. That's not an option. Then what do we do? Tears streamed down her face. She's my sister, my only family. I can't just abandon her. You're not. Dom's expression was grim. I am. I'm going to get her back. You're going to stay here with Lily where it's safe. How? How can you possibly save her from a trap meant for you? Because I spent 8 years in force recon learning how to walk into traps and walk back out. Something deadly flickered in his eyes. And because Vincent just made the mistake of thinking I value my own life more than keeping my promises. He pulled out his phone, made another call. Marco, get the team. Full tactical gear. We're hitting Vincent's warehouse in South Philly. 1 hour. Rachel grabbed his arm. You can't, it's suicide. He'll have dozens of men. Probably, Dom agreed calmly. But he has something I need, and I'm very good at taking what I need. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. She's my sister. And you're David's widow and Lily's mother. Dom's voice was steel. You don't get to risk yourself. That's not negotiable. Rachel's hands shook with fear and fury and helplessness. She knew he was right. Knew that going would make things worse. But the thought of Maria alone and terrified, held by monsters, made her want to scream. Bring her home, she whispered. Please, I'm begging you, bring my sister home. Dom's expression softened for just a moment. I will, I promise, but I need you to do something for me. What? Stay alive. Stay with Lily. No matter what happens tonight, no matter what you hear, you stay in this house with Marco's men protecting you. Can you do that? Rachel wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but she looked into his dark eyes and saw the same determination that had carried 24 Marines into battles they didn't all walk away from. Dom would get Maria back or die trying, and all she could do was trust him. I'll stay, her voice broke. But if you don't come back, if you get yourself killed trying to save my sister, I'll never forgive you. Fair enough. Dom leaned down, pressed his forehead to hers in a gesture so intimate it stole her breath. Take care of Lily. Tell her Mr. Dom had to help a friend, but he'll see her soon. Then he was gone, moving with the purposeful stride of a man walking into war. Rachel stood in his office surrounded by photographs of dead Marines and wondered if she'd just watched another one go to his death. She didn't sleep, couldn't. She sat in the living room with all the lights on, phone clutched in her hand, waiting. Marco had left with Dom, taking most of the guards. Only 2 remained, young men who tried to look confident but couldn't quite hide their nervousness. Hours passed like centuries. Midnight came and went. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. Rachel's imagination conjured horrors she couldn't stop. Dom bleeding out in a warehouse. Maria tortured. Both of them dying because Rachel had accepted protection from a man whose very existence made her a target. At 3:15 in the morning, headlights swept through the front windows. Rachel was at the door before the car stopped, heart hammering, prayers she didn't believe in falling from her lips. Marco emerged first, supporting a woman. Maria, alive, crying, bruised but breathing. Rachel ran down the steps, caught her sister, held her while Maria sobbed into her shoulder. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. He had men with guns and they just grabbed me and I thought I was going to die." "SHH, you're safe. You're safe now." Behind them, another car pulled up. Dom emerged from the passenger side and Rachel's breath caught. His shirt was soaked with blood. His left arm hung useless at his side. His face was pale under the streetlights. "You're shot." Rachel's voice came out strangled. "Through and through, shoulder. I've had worse." Dom swayed slightly, caught himself against the car. "Got your sister out, that's what matters." Marco was already supporting him, guiding him toward the house. Rachel followed with Maria, her mind splitting between relief that her sister was alive and terror at the amount of blood staining Dom's clothes. Inside, Marco laid Dom on the leather couch, barking orders at the guards. One was calling a doctor, someone who apparently made house calls for gunshot wounds without involving police. The other was bringing towels, medical supplies, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Rachel settled Maria in the kitchen with tea, made sure she wasn't seriously hurt beyond bruises and terror, then found herself drawn back to the living room where Dom lay bleeding. "You should rest," Marco said gently. "The doctor will be here in 20 minutes. "I need to see him." Rachel moved to the couch, knelt beside it. Dom's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage Marco had applied. "Dom." His eyes opened, unfocused with pain. "Rachel, your sister, is she okay?" "She's alive because of you." Rachel's hands shook as she reached for his uninjured hand. "You kept your promise." "Always." His voice was barely audible. "Always keep my promises. Even when it means getting shot." "Especially then." A ghost of a smile crossed his pale lips. "David would have done the same. I'm just following his example." Tears blurred Rachel's vision. "You can't keep doing this. You can't keep risking yourself for us." "Can't stop." Dom's eyes were drifting closed again. "Only thing that makes sense anymore. Only mission I have left." The doctor arrived, a middle-aged woman with efficient hands and no questions. She shooed everyone from the room except Marco, and Rachel found herself in the kitchen with Maria, both of them drinking tea neither could taste, listening to the sounds of treatment filtering through the walls. "Who is he?" Maria asked finally. "The man who saved me." Rachel tried to find words to explain Dominic Castellano. Crime boss, former Marine, her dead husband's sergeant, a man haunted by 24 ghosts trying to save the 25th, a promise made in blood and kept at any cost. "Someone who knew David," she said finally. "Someone who can't let go of the war." "He's in love with you." "No," Rachel shook her head. "He's in love with a promise. I'm just the mission that keeps him human." "That's the same thing." Maria reached across the table, took her hand. "Rachel, that man just walked into an ambush and got shot pulling me out of a warehouse full of armed criminals. That's not duty. That's devotion." Rachel wanted to argue, wanted to explain that Dom's feelings weren't about her, but about guilt and survivors' remorse and obligations that transcended normal human emotion. But Maria's words resonated somewhere deep in her chest, in the place where she'd been alone for 5 years, and was only now realizing how much she'd craved being someone's priority. The doctor emerged an hour later, wiping blood from her hands. "He'll live. Bullet went clean through, missed major arteries. He needs rest and antibiotics and probably actual medical care at a hospital. But since I assume that's not an option, he needs to stay down for at least 48 hours. Marco thanked her, paid her in cash Rachel didn't want to contemplate, and showed her out. Rachel stood at the base of the stairs, looking toward the living room where Dom lay sedated and bandaged, and made a decision that terrified her. She climbed the stairs, checked on Lily sleeping peacefully with her stuffed rabbit, then returned to the living room. Marco had gone to brief the guards, leaving Dom alone on the couch. Rachel sat on the floor beside him, took his uninjured hand, and let herself cry. For David, dead 5 years, but still dictating the course of her life through the promise he'd extracted from his sergeant. For Dom, drowning in guilt and choosing to honor it through violence and protection. For herself, trapped between gratitude and fear, knowing that accepting his help meant accepting his world. For Lily, who deserved a father and had only the ghost of one and a dangerous stranger who bought her toys and got shot rescuing her aunt. "I don't know what to do," she whispered to the unconscious man beside her. "I don't know how to accept this, how to live with what you are, how to reconcile the man who plays tea party with my daughter with the man who just killed people to save my sister." Dom didn't answer. Couldn't. But his hand tightened slightly around hers, and Rachel sat there in the expensive townhouse, surrounded by the trappings of a criminal empire, holding the hand of a man who'd pledged his life to a dead Marine's family, and wondered when her life had stopped being hers. The sun rose over Philadelphia, painting the garden in shades of gold and amber. Maria slept upstairs in the guest room. Lily would wake soon, asking for breakfast and Mr. Dom. The guards outside maintained their watch, and Rachel sat beside a man who'd taken a bullet for her sister, knowing that the price of his protection was higher than she'd imagined. But she also knew, sitting there in the dawn light, that she couldn't walk away. Not from this house. Not from this complicated, dangerous man. Not from the only person in 5 years who'd made her feel like she mattered. It was a cage, just like she'd feared. But it was also shelter. And after 5 years of fighting alone, maybe shelter was enough. Even if it came with blood on the walls and ghosts in the hallways, and a guardian who couldn't save himself, but would die trying to save her. Dom spent 3 days on the couch recovering from the gunshot wound. 3 days where Rachel saw behind the mask of the crime boss to the man underneath. He was terrible at being injured, fought the doctor's orders to rest, tried to work from his phone until Rachel threatened to confiscate it. Lily appointed herself his nurse, bringing him water and crackers, reading him stories in her 5-year-old voice that turned every word into an adventure. Rachel watched her daughter curl up beside this dangerous man, watched him listen to her rambling narratives with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone who'd killed people 2 nights ago, and felt something shift in her chest. On the 4th day, Dom could stand without swaying. He found Rachel in the kitchen making coffee in the expensive machine she still didn't quite know how to operate. The morning light through the windows turned his dark hair bronze, highlighted the new lines of pain around his eyes. His left arm was in a sling, the bandages visible under his black shirt. "I need to tell you something," he said without preamble, "about what happens next." Rachel set down the coffee cup she'd been filling. Vincent is the symptom. The disease is bigger." Dom moved to the windows, looked out at the garden where frost was just beginning to melt under weak November sun. "I run the Castellano family. We control territory from South Philly to the waterfront. Gambling, protection, smuggling. 5 other families operate in the greater Philadelphia area. We maintain balance through fear and respect and the occasional show of force. Like rescuing my sister from a warehouse." "Like that," he turned to face her. Vincent broke the rules by going after you and Maria, but the other families are watching. They're wondering if I'm weak now, if my attachment to you makes me vulnerable. Some are considering whether to support Vincent in a move against me. Rachel's blood chilled. So this isn't over. It's never over in my world, but it can end. Dom's expression was bleak. I can finish it, permanently, but the cost is everything. What do you mean? I've been talking to the FBI, Agent Sarah Chen. She's been investigating organized crime in Philadelphia for 3 years, not very successfully. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I can give her everything. Financial records, operation details, names, dates. 5 crime families on a silver platter, including mine. The words hung in the air like smoke. Rachel stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You want to testify against your own organization. I want to burn it all down. Dom's voice was flat. I inherited this empire from my father. Spent 5 years running it because it's what he built, what he wanted for me. But it's not what David would have wanted. It's not what any of those Marines on my wall fought for. They died believing in honor and sacrifice and protecting those who can't protect themselves. I've dishonored all of that. By protecting me. By using dirty money and criminal methods to do it. He moved closer, and she could see the intensity in his dark eyes. I made a promise to David. I've kept it the only way I knew how. But maybe there's a better way. Maybe I can honor him by choosing what's right instead of what's easy. Rachel's throat tightened. If you testify, you'll go to prison. Yes, long time, probably. But the FBI is offering a deal. I give them everything, I cooperate fully, and in exchange, you and Lily get witness protection. New identities, new city, completely hidden. Vincent can't touch you. No one can. And you. I'll serve my time. Maybe get out when I'm in my 50s if I'm lucky, but you'll be safe. Lily will grow up without looking over her shoulder. That's all that matters. Rachel felt tears burning in her eyes. You're choosing prison to protect us. I'm choosing prison because it's what David would have done. Dom's voice broke slightly. He died with honor. I've been living without it. Time to fix that. The weight of his decisions settled over her like a shroud. This man, this complicated, dangerous, devoted man, was willing to destroy his entire life to keep a promise to a dead Marine. It was insane. It was noble. It was breaking her heart. What about your people? Marco, the others who work for you. Non-violent members get immunity as part of the deal. Marco will be fine. The ones who have killed, they'll face charges, but lighter sentences for cooperation. Dom reached out with his good hand, touched her face. I'm not doing this blind, Rachel. I'm doing it knowing exactly what it costs, and it's worth it. You and Lily's safe is worth everything. I don't want you to go to prison for us. Then you should have married someone other than David Martinez. His smile was sad. But you didn't. You married a Marine who made me promise to take care of his family. This is how I keep that promise and live with myself afterward. Rachel couldn't stop the tears now. She moved into his arms, careful of his injured shoulder, and let herself cry against his chest, while he held her with his good arm and whispered things in Italian she didn't understand but felt in her bones. When? She asked finally, pulling back to look at him. 2 weeks. FBI needs time to build the case, coordinate with other agencies. But there's a complication. His expression hardened. Vincent knows something is happening. He's moving against my operations, trying to force a confrontation before I can act. Agent Chen thinks he might try one more assault. Here, against you. Rachel's breath caught. He'd attack a safe house. He attacked a warehouse full of my men to take your sister. He's desperate and stupid, dangerous combination. Dom's hand tightened on her shoulder. But we'll be ready. I'm bringing in everyone. Full tactical setup. If Vincent comes, he won't leave. The next 10 days passed in a strange tension. Dom brought in more guards, men who moved like soldiers and spoke in the clipped efficiency of people who'd seen combat. Marco coordinated rotations, established perimeters, turned the elegant townhouse into a fortress that somehow still felt like a home. Lily noticed the changes, but with a child's adaptability turned it into a game, playing hide and seek with the guards who indulged her with patient smiles. Rachel watched Dom prepare for war while simultaneously dismantling his empire. He spent hours with lawyers and FBI agents, turning over evidence, explaining operations, condemning himself with every word. Agent Chen visited twice, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked at Rachel with something like pity. "You understand what he's doing for you?" Chen asked during her second visit, while Dom was upstairs putting Lily to bed. "Yes," Rachel kept her voice steady. "He's sacrificing everything. Men like Castellano don't usually flip. They take their secrets to the grave. Whatever promise he made to your husband must have been sacred." Chen paused. "We'll take care of you and your daughter. New identities, relocation assistance, job placement. You'll disappear completely." "And Dom?" "Mr. Castellano will face justice, but his cooperation will be noted. 15 to 20 years, probably eligible for parole in 10 with good behavior." Chen's expression softened slightly. "He'll survive it. Men like him always do. Question is whether he can live with what he's giving up." What he was giving up was a life, an empire, a legacy his father had built. What he was gaining was the ability to look at himself in the mirror without seeing 24 dead Marines staring back. Rachel understood the trade, even if she didn't know how to feel about being the reason for it. On the 11th night, Vincent made his move. Rachel woke to the sound of breaking glass, adrenaline spiking through her system before she was fully conscious. She was out of bed and running to Lily's room before her mind caught up with her body. Her daughter was already awake, eyes wide with fear, and Rachel scooped her up, held her tight. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. We're safe." The sounds of gunfire erupted from downstairs. Not the sharp cracks of television, but deeper, heavier sounds that Rachel felt in her chest. Men shouting, more glass breaking, the distinctive thunder of a shotgun. Marco burst into the room, his grandfather's face grim. "Safe room, now." He led them down the hallway to what Rachel had thought was a linen closet. Inside, a heavy door disguised to look like the back wall. Marco entered a code, pushed it open to reveal a reinforced room with concrete walls, surveillance monitors, emergency supplies. A panic room, like Dom had promised that first day. "Stay here, lock it from inside. Don't open for anyone except me or Mr. Castellano. Understand?" Rachel nodded, clutching Lily, who was crying now, frightened by the sounds and the tension. Marco sealed them inside, and Rachel heard the lock engage with a sound like a vault closing. The monitors showed multiple camera angles. The front of the townhouse where 3 black SUVs had pulled up, men in tactical gear pouring out at least a dozen. Vincent's assault team. Dom's guards were engaging them, gunfire strobing in the darkness. Rachel counted 6 of Dom's men against 12 of Vincent's. The math was bad. She found Dom on the monitors, recognized his silhouette even in the dark. He was on the first floor, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this before, shoulder injury forgotten in the heat of combat. He had a rifle, was coordinating his men with hand signals Rachel recognized from movies about Marines. They were outnumbered but better trained, falling back to defensive positions, making Vincent's people pay for every foot of ground. Lily huddled against Rachel's side, face buried in her mother's shirt. Rachel held her daughter with one arm and watched the monitors with her heart in her throat, watching the man who'd promised to protect them risk everything to keep that promise one more time. The assault lasted 20 minutes that felt like hours. Vincent's team breached the first floor, room by room fighting, brutal and close. Dom's guards fell back to the stairwell, created a choke point that turned the elegant townhouse into a killing ground. 2 of Dom's men went down, 4 of Vincent's. The math was still bad, but getting better. Then Vincent himself appeared on the monitors, stepping out of the lead SUV like he had all the time in the world. He was talking on a phone, gesturing, and Rachel realized he was directing the assault remotely, staying safe while his men did the dying. Dom must have seen the same thing. Rachel watched him make a decision, saw it in the set of his shoulders. He said something to Marco, handed off the rifle, and disappeared from the camera's view. 3 minutes later, he reappeared on the exterior cameras, moving along the side of the townhouse using shadows like cover. He had a pistol now, smaller, easier to handle with one functional arm. Vincent was still on his phone, flanked by 2 bodyguards, confident in his numbers and his planning. He didn't see Dom until it was too late. Dom moved like a ghost, came up behind Vincent's bodyguards with the silence of someone who'd learned to walk without sound in places where noise meant death. The first guard went down without a sound, arm around his throat, movement clinical and efficient. The second turned, started to raise his weapon, and Dom shot him. Center mass, 2 rounds, the guard dropped. Vincent spun, finally seeing the threat, finally understanding that the man he'd been trying to kill had walked through his assault and come for him personally. "It's over, Vincent." Dom's voice carried through the night, picked up by the camera's audio. "Your men are dead or dying. Mine are still fighting. You lost." Vincent's hand moved toward his coat, toward a weapon, and Dom shot him. Not center mass. The leg. Vincent went down screaming, clutching his thigh. Dom stood over him, pistol pointed down, and Rachel held her breath waiting for the execution shot. Waiting for Dom to finish it the way men in his world finished things. He didn't. "You wanted to use Rachel to destroy me." Dom's voice was cold. "Congratulations, you succeeded, just not the way you planned." Police sirens cut through the night, lots of them getting closer. Dom lowered his weapon, dropped it, raised his good hand in the air. Marco appeared with the other surviving guards, all of them disarming, all of them assuming the position of men who knew the drill. Agent Chen's voice came over a bullhorn. "Dominic Castellano, you're under arrest. On your knees, hands behind your head." Rachel watched on the monitors as Dom complied, as federal agents swarmed the townhouse, as they cuffed him and read him his rights. She watched Vincent get loaded into an ambulance under guard, watched the bodies of dead men get covered with tarps, watched the empire Dom had inherited get dismantled in real time. Marco appeared at the safe room door, entered the code, his face exhausted. "It's over, Mrs. Martinez. Vincent is arrested. Mr. Castellano is in federal custody. You and Lily are safe." Rachel emerged into a townhouse that looked like a war zone. Bullet holes in the walls, blood on the expensive floors, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Federal agents were everywhere, collecting evidence, interviewing witnesses, processing what would probably be the biggest organized crime arrest in Philadelphia history. Agent Chen found her in the living room, where Rachel sat with Lily in her lap, both of them wrapped in shock blankets an EMT had provided. "Are you hurt?" "No, we were in the safe room. Dom made sure we were protected." "He kept his word." Chen's expression was unreadable. "Vincent Romano is going to prison for a very long time. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy. And that's before we add the RICO charges from Castellano's testimony. And Dom is being processed now. He'll be arraigned tomorrow. Judge will probably deny bail given the charges." Chen paused. "He asked me to tell you something. He said the promise is kept. You and Lily are free." "Free? The word felt strange. Rachel looked around the destroyed townhouse, at the evidence of violence and the price of protection, and wondered what freedom meant when it came soaked in blood. The next 6 months passed in a blur of legal proceedings and life transitions. Rachel and Lily disappeared into witness protection, given new identities, and relocated to a small town in Montana where nobody knew about widowed waitresses or Marine sergeants who became crime bosses. Rachel got a job as a teacher's aide. Lily started kindergarten. They built a life that looked nothing like the one they'd left behind. Dom's trial was national news. The crime boss who turned state's evidence, destroying 5 organized crime families in the process. Rachel watched it on television in her new apartment, saw Dom in an orange jumpsuit looking thinner and older, testifying day after day with the same clinical precision he'd used to dismantle Vincent's assault. Vincent got life without parole. The other family bosses got similar sentences. Dom's cooperation earned him consideration but not freedom. 15 years, eligible for parole in 10. The judge called it mercy tempered with justice. Rachel wrote him one letter, sent through Agent Chen to an address she wasn't allowed to know. She told him Lily was safe and happy, that they'd started over, that she thought about him sometimes and hoped he found peace. She didn't say she loved him because she didn't know if what she felt was love or gratitude or something more complicated. She signed it simply, Rachel. She never got a response, didn't expect one. Men like Dom didn't need closure. They needed missions, and his mission was complete. 3 years passed. Lily grew from 5 to 8, lost teeth and gained independence, asked fewer questions about Mr. Dom who'd been her friend for such a short time. Rachel dated a local contractor named Mike who was nice and stable and everything Dom wasn't. It didn't work out. Some part of her was still in that Philadelphia townhouse, still watching a man willing to burn his entire world down to keep a promise. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, forwarded through so many anonymous channels Rachel almost didn't recognize it as meant for her. Inside was a single page in a child's handwriting. Dear Mr. Dom, Mommy says you were Daddy's friend. Thank you for helping us. I'm in 3rd grade now. I got straight A's. Mommy says Daddy would be proud. Are you proud too? Your friend Lily. Underneath, in different handwriting, adult and careful, she doesn't know everything. Just that you served with David and helped us when we needed it. We're safe. We're happy. David's memory lives in Lily's smile. Thank you for keeping your promise. It wasn't signed, but Rachel knew Dom would recognize the hand. She imagined him reading it in whatever federal prison held him. Imagined him sitting in a cell with that letter, the only proof that his sacrifice had meant something. She hoped it brought him peace. Hoped that somewhere in the system that had swallowed him, he'd found a way to live with the ghosts. 10 years. He'd be eligible for parole in 7 more years. He'd be 42, still young enough to build something from the ruins. Rachel wondered if she'd still be in Montana then, still trying to forget the man who'd given up everything for a promise made to a dying Marine. She folded the letter carefully, put it in the drawer where she kept David's posthumous medals and the dog tags the Marines had given her when they'd told her he wasn't coming home. 2 Marines, both gone in different ways, both having shaped her life in ways she was still trying to understand. That night she dreamed of Arlington National Cemetery, of rows of white stones under gray skies, of a young Marine in dress blues being lowered into ground that had held too many heroes. She dreamed of Dom standing at the grave, making a promise he'd spend the rest of his life keeping. She woke with tears on her face and Lily's warm weight beside her, having climbed into bed during the night the way she sometimes did when thunder scared her. Rachel held her daughter and thought about sacrifice and redemption and the different ways people honored the fallen. Somewhere in a federal prison, Dominic Castellano was thinking the same things. 7 years later, on a cold morning in November, Dom walked out of federal prison a free man. He'd served 10 years, earned parole through model behavior and helping other inmates get their GEDs. He was 42 years old, gray at the temples, harder and leaner than the man who'd gone in. Marco was waiting with a car, older too, but smiling. "Welcome back, boss." "Not a boss anymore, Marco, just Dom." They drove in silence for a while, watching Pennsylvania roll past the windows. Dom had spent a decade in a cage thinking about this moment, planning what came next. He had money in accounts the feds hadn't found, enough to live quietly. He had no interest in returning to the life he'd left. "Where to?" Marco asked. "Arlington." The drive took 4 hours. Marco didn't ask questions, just drove, giving Dom space to process freedom after a decade of controlled movement and locked doors. They arrived at Arlington National Cemetery as the sun was setting, painting the white stones gold and amber. Dom walked alone through Section 60, past row after row of modern war dead, Marines and soldiers and sailors who'd given everything for a country that would forget most of their names. He found the stone he was looking for without trouble. He'd memorized the location years ago from the burial information the Corps had sent. Corporal David Martinez, United States Marine Corps, Purple Heart, loving husband and father, Semper Fidelis. Dom knelt, touched the cold marble, and felt the weight of 10 years lift slightly from his shoulders. "I kept my promise, brother. Rachel and Lily are safe, hidden where no one can hurt them. Lily's 15 now, honor student happy. Rachel's got a good life, far from everything we were." He paused, swallowing against the tightness in his throat. "I gave up everything to make sure of it. Spent 10 years in a federal pen. Lost the business, the life, everything Dad built. But you know what? I sleep now. First time since Helmand. First time since I watched you bleed out because I made the wrong call." A breeze moved through the cemetery, cold with approaching winter. Dom pulled David's dog tags from his pocket, the spare set he'd carried for 15 years. He'd kept them even in prison, hidden and precious, a reminder of the promise that had defined half his life. "You can have these back now, don't need them anymore. I remember what they mean. Honor, sacrifice, protecting those who can't protect themselves. I forgot those things for a while, but I found my way back." He placed the tags on the grave, weighted them down with a small stone so they wouldn't blow away. "The other guys, the ones on my wall, they'd be proud, I think. 24 brothers who didn't come home. I came home, but I didn't really live until I found a way to honor what you all died for." Dom stood, saluted the way he'd been taught at Paris Island a lifetime ago, the way David had deserved 15 years earlier. "Semper Fi, brother. See you in Valhalla." He walked back through the rows of white stones, past young Marines whose stories he'd never know, whose families would carry the weight of their sacrifices the way Rachel had carried David's. The sun had set fully now, leaving the cemetery in twilight, and Dom felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Peace. Not happiness. He'd given up the right to that when he'd chosen to run a criminal empire, but peace with the choices he'd made and the price he'd paid. Peace with the knowledge that somewhere in Montana, a woman and her daughter lived free because he'd been willing to sacrifice everything. It was enough. Marco waited by the car, patient as always. "We're now, boss." Dom looked back at the cemetery one last time, at the field of white stones holding America's heroes, at the grave that had defined half his life. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere I can figure out who I am when I'm not trying to honor the dead." "You know where she is." It wasn't a question. Marco had always been too observant. Dom shook his head. "Knowing and going are different things. Rachel deserves a life without me in it. I'm a reminder of everything she lost and everything she survived. She doesn't need that." "Maybe you should let her decide that." Maybe. Dom climbed into the car, settled into leather seats that felt strange after a decade of metal bunks and concrete walls. But not today. Today I'm just a Marine who finally figured out how to come home. They drove away from Arlington as full dark settled over Washington. Behind them, David Martinez's grave stood silent among thousands of others, the dog tags catching the last light, a promise kept and a debt finally paid. Somewhere in Montana, Rachel Martinez was putting her 15-year-old daughter to bed, checking homework and setting alarms, living the normal life she'd never thought possible. She thought sometimes about the man who'd made it possible, wondered if he'd survived prison, if he'd found peace. She didn't know he was free, didn't know he'd visited David's grave, didn't know that somewhere in Pennsylvania, Dominic Castellano was learning to be human again. Maybe someday their paths would cross. Maybe Lily would want to meet the man who'd known her father, who'd kept a promise that had saved their lives. Maybe Rachel would want to tell him that his sacrifice had mattered, that they'd built something good from the ruins he'd left behind. Or maybe the story ended here, with a widow raising her daughter in peace, and a former crime boss trying to atone for sins that couldn't be washed away with prison time. Maybe some debts weren't meant to be resolved, just carried until they became part of who you were. Dom didn't have the answers. All he had was the memory of a promise made in blood on a battlefield 15 years ago, and the knowledge that he'd kept it at any cost. Semper Fidelis, always faithful. The Marines had taught him that. David Martinez had shown him what it meant, and Rachel and Lily had given him a reason to prove he understood. It was enough. It had to be. The car disappeared into the Pennsylvania night, carrying a man who'd been a sergeant and a crime boss and a prisoner, searching for whatever came next. Behind him stretched 15 years of choices and consequences. Ahead lay only possibility. And in Arlington National Cemetery, under a sky full of stars, a Marine's grave held dog tags that had traveled from Afghanistan to Philadelphia, to federal prison, and finally home. The promise was kept, the debt was paid, the ghosts could finally rest. And somewhere in the darkness, if you listened carefully enough, you could almost hear 25 Marines standing down, their missions complete, their brothers finally at peace. Semper Fi. Always faithful. Until the very end. Thank you for listening to Semper Fidelis. This story hit me hard while recording it. Dom's struggle between honoring a promise and facing the consequences of his choices reminded me why I started this channel, to tell stories that matter to those who have served and sacrificed. I want to hear from you. Have you ever made a promise that changed your life? As veterans, many of you understand the weight of brotherhood and the debts we carry for those who didn't come home. Dom chose prison over dishonor. Would you have made the same choice? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your perspectives make this community what it is. New here, hit that subscribe button and join our community of storytellers who understand that honor isn't just a word, it's a way of life. Next up, check out our playlist for more stories exploring sacrifice, redemption, and the bonds that define us.